my legs just giving out from under me when I saw Devon and Damon in the casket. They looked like they were sleeping, but they were so cold. I remember just touching them and kissing them and talking to them. It just didn't seem, it just didn't seem real. It just seemed,
what if I told you that a mother's smile could seal her death sentence? What if I told you that in the state of Texas, a woman sits on death row not because of DNA evidence, not because of fingerprints, but because of how she grieved her murdered children? What if everything you thought you knew about maternal love, justice, and the American legal system was built on a lie? Tonight, we dive into one of the most controversial death penalty cases in modern history. A case where a can of silly string became more damning than any murder weapon. The death penalty exists in 33 states across America, yet fewer than half actively carry out executions. In the Lone Star State of Texas, death comes by lethal injection, a clinical, sanitized end to lives deemed unworthy of continuation. But in the remote corners of Utah and Oklahoma, the firing squad still waits, a brutal reminder of frontier justice. Deep in the heart of Texas, past rolling hills and endless highways, sits Gatesville, a town that time forgot. Here, behind towering concrete walls and razor wire, stands the Mountain View Correctional Facility. It's a fortress of despair, home to the state's most dangerous women and a handful condemned to die. On this gray morning, a prison transport van crawls through the facility's gates. Inside, barely visible through tinted windows, sits a figure draped in what appears to be tissue paper, a suicide prevention gown. This specter is Darlie Routier, condemned to death for the most unthinkable crime, the murder of her own children. Mountain View Unit houses Texas's female death row inmates in isolation cells that measure barely 8 by 10 feet. Here, Darlie will remain until the day comes for her final journey, 150 miles east to Huntsville, where the death chamber awaits. The scene carries an almost medieval quality, reminiscent of ancient passion plays where justice and mercy battled for souls.
They're up in heaven, and they're up there having the biggest birthday party that we could ever imagine.
Rowlett, Texas, a picture-perfect suburb of Dallas where manicured lawns stretch endlessly and white picket fences guard the American dream. McMansions line pristine streets where children ride bicycles and neighbors wave from their driveways. Nothing in this idyllic setting hints at the darkness that would soon consume one family and captivate a nation. The Routier home stood as a monument to suburban success, a sprawling two-story house with all the trappings of prosperity. Inside lived Darlie and Darren Routier with their 3 young sons, Devon, 6, Damon, 5, and baby Drake, just 7 months old. To outsiders, they appeared to have it all. But beneath the surface of this perfect life, cracks were beginning to show. Financial pressures mounted as the family lived beyond their means, chasing an image of success they couldn't afford. Credit cards maxed out, mortgage payments fell behind, and the weight of maintaining their facade grew heavier with each passing day. Then came June 6, 1996, a date that would forever shatter the illusion of safety in this suburban paradise. At 2:31 in the morning, a frantic 911 call pierced the silence. The caller was Darlie Routier, and her words would launch one of the most polarizing criminal cases in American history.
Hang on. Hang on, ma'am. I'm not medical emergency. Ma'am, I'm trying to get an ambulance to you. Hang on a minute. What's going on, ma'am? Drive, 5801 Eagle Drive. It's going to be a stabbing. When are they going to be here? Ma'am, they're on their way. Ma'am, how old are your boys? What? How old are your boys? No. Okay. Oh my God! Oh my God! Calm down, can you? Is your name Darlie? Should I put that down? There's nobody in your head. You don't know who did this?
History. The first responders arrived at 5801 Eagle Drive to find a scene that would haunt them forever. Two young boys lay motionless on the family room floor, their small bodies bearing the savage wounds of a knife attack. Devon and Damon Routier had been stabbed with such violence that the blade had penetrated completely through their bodies, chipping the concrete floor beneath. Darlie Routier stood in the kitchen, blood soaking her white nightgown, a gaping wound across her throat. She told investigators a chilling tale. An intruder had entered their home while the family slept downstairs. She had awakened to find a shadowy figure attacking her children, then felt the knife slice across her own neck as she tried to intervene. But as paramedics worked desperately to save the boys' lives, something felt wrong to the veteran officers on scene. The evidence didn't seem to match Darlie's story. The supposed point of entry, a screen door, showed cuts that appeared staged. The murder weapon, a knife from the Routier's own kitchen, lay conveniently placed in a utility room. Most disturbing of all was Darlie's behavior. While her children lay dying, she seemed more concerned about her jewelry than her boys' welfare. She told officers she had touched the murder weapon, contaminating potential evidence. To these hardened investigators, nothing about this grieving mother seemed right. The youngest son, baby Drake, had slept peacefully upstairs throughout the attack, untouched by the violence that claimed his brothers. This detail would later fuel speculation about why the intruder spared one child while savagely murdering the other two. As crime scene technicians processed the house, a disturbing picture began to emerge. Blood evidence painted a story that contradicted Darlie's account at every turn. Vacuum cleaner impressions in blood suggested the scene had been staged after the attack. Bloody footprints led investigators to question the timeline Darlie had provided. Most damning of all were the blood spatter patterns on Darlie's nightgown. Microscopic droplets of her son's blood decorated both the front and back of her shirt in patterns consistent with someone wielding the murder weapon. The blood had been cast upward during the violent stabbing motion. According to experts, landing on the killer in a telltale signature of guilt. But perhaps the most puzzling piece of evidence was discovered 75 yards from the house. A tube sock soaked with the boy's blood, lying exposed in an alley near a storm drain. If Darlie had planted it there to support her intruder theory, why leave it so obviously visible? If an actual intruder had dropped it, how had he managed to travel so far from the house while bleeding profusely? The investigation revealed financial motives that could drive a desperate person to desperate acts. The Routiers had applied for a loan shortly before the murders and been rejected due to their precarious financial situation. They were behind on their mortgage, drowning in credit card debt, and living a lifestyle they couldn't sustain. Were Devon and Damon seen as obstacles to a fresh start? Investigators also uncovered Darlie's suicide contemplation through diary entries addressed to her children. Dark thoughts that painted a picture of a woman at the end of a rope. Had murder-suicide crossed her mind, only to be abandoned when self-preservation kicked in? 8 days after the murders, as Darlie recovered from her injuries in the hospital, she made a decision that would seal her fate. June 14th was Devon's 7th birthday, and Darlie insisted on holding a celebration at his gravesite. What happened next would become the most controversial piece of evidence in her case. The family gathered at Rowlett Memorial Park, where Devon and Damon lay buried side by side. As cameras rolled, documenting what should have been a solemn memorial, something unprecedented occurred. Darlie began laughing, spraying silly string on her son's graves, and appearing almost joyful as she celebrated what would have been Devon's birthday. The footage was devastating. Here was a mother, barely a week after losing 2 children to a brutal murder, seemingly celebrating at their gravesite. The images defied every expectation of how a grieving parent should behave. When the video aired on local news, public opinion turned sharply against Darlie Routier. Prosecutors would later use this video as the cornerstone of their case, arguing it revealed Darlie's true nature, a cold, calculating woman incapable of genuine maternal love. Defense attorneys countered that grief manifests differently in different people, and that the celebration honored what the boys would have wanted. But the damage was done. The following day, Darlie Routier was arrested and charged with capital murder. The silly string video had accomplished what weeks of investigation couldn't. It had turned public sentiment decisively against her. The trial of Darlie Routier became a media sensation, drawing national attention to the small town of Kerrville, Texas, where the case had been moved due to pretrial publicity. Prosecutors painted Darlie as a narcissistic woman who killed her children because they interfered with her desired lifestyle. The state's case relied heavily on the blood evidence and Darlie's behavior in the aftermath of the murders. Expert witnesses testified about the cast-off blood patterns on her nightgown, the staged appearance of the crime scene, and the impossibility of her intruder story. The silly string video played over and over, each viewing seeming to confirm the prosecution's portrait of a heartless killer. Defense attorneys struggled against the tide of public opinion. They argued that Darlie's wounds proved she was a victim, not a perpetrator. The cut across her throat had come within millimeters of severing her carotid artery, hardly the kind of self-inflicted wound someone would risk. They challenged the blood evidence and pointed to the mysterious sock as proof an intruder had been present. But the jury had made up their minds long before deliberations began. After viewing the silly string video 9 times during their discussions, they returned a guilty verdict. Darlie Routier was sentenced to death, becoming one of only 11 women on Texas's death row.
When they were telling me that I had done this, I was in shock. I was completely blindsided. I couldn't even grasp what they were telling me, that they were saying I was under arrest for murdering my children. That night was just like every other night. School had been out. The boys had been playing in the house and outside. And the boys wanted to sleep downstairs. You know, they had their little blankets and pillows, like a little camp out. I had decided I was gonna sleep downstairs with the boys. The next thing, I feel Damon pushing on my shoulder. And I hear him say, "Mommy, Mommy." When I woke up, I'm a little bit disoriented, but I could see like the outline of a man that was going through the end of the living area into the kitchen. There was a sound of glass breaking. I stood up and I started to walk to the kitchen. And there was a knife laying down on the ground right outside the utility room. I picked it up. It was just like an instinct. The man, I guess he had gone out through the utility room into the garage. And at that time, I could see Devon laying face up. And I flicked on the lights, and I remember screaming and screaming for Darren.
More than 2 decades have passed since that June morning in Rowlett, and Darlie Routier remains in her 8x10 cell at Mountain View Unit. Her case has become a lightning rod for debates about the death penalty, maternal stereotypes, and the reliability of forensic evidence. Post-conviction attorneys have raised serious questions about the investigation and trial. They argue that crucial DNA evidence was never properly tested, that the crime scene was contaminated, and that prosecutorial misconduct tainted the proceedings. New forensic techniques, unavailable in 1997, could potentially exonerate Darlie, or confirm her guilt once and for all. The mysterious fingerprint that couldn't be matched to anyone in the house continues to fuel speculation about an unknown intruder. Defense attorneys claim 4 independent experts have examined the print and found it viable for identification, contradicting the state's assertion that it was too smudged to be useful. Meanwhile, Darlie's family maintains an unwavering belief in her innocence. Her mother has spent decades fighting for her daughter's freedom, organizing supporters, and challenging evidence. They argue that Darlie was railroaded by a system that couldn't accept a grieving mother who didn't fit society's expectations. The case has inspired books, documentaries, and countless online discussions among true crime enthusiasts. Some see Darlie as the victim of a rush to judgment by investigators who decided on her guilt within minutes of arriving at the scene. Others view her as a master manipulator who continues to play the victim while sitting on death row. As we examine this case, more than 25 years later, one question continues to divide opinion. Could a mother really murder her own children in such a savage manner? The prosecution argued yes, pointing to financial stress, marital problems, and Darlie's apparent narcissism as motivation. The defense maintained that such an act was incomprehensible, that no mother could inflict such wounds on her babies. But criminal history is filled with cases that defy our understanding of human nature. Parents have killed children for insurance money, for freedom, for reasons that make no sense to rational minds. The capacity for evil exists even in those we expect to embody love and protection. The physical evidence in this case points in multiple directions. The blood on Darlie's nightgown seems to indicate her presence during the attack, but her own wounds suggest she was also a victim. The staged crime scene implies guilt, but the mysterious sock and unidentified fingerprint hint at unknown perpetrators. What remains undeniable is that 2 innocent children lost their lives in a horrific act of violence. Devon and Damon Routier never got to celebrate another birthday, never got to grow up and experience life's joys and sorrows. Whether their mother was their killer or a fellow victim, the tragedy of their deaths resonates through the decades. Today, Darlie Routier continues her fight against time and the state of Texas. New DNA testing offers hope for definitive answers, while the clock ticks toward a potential execution date. Her case represents everything controversial about America's death penalty system. The possibility of executing an innocent person based on flawed evidence and societal prejudices. The appeals process moves slowly, with each legal challenge met by prosecutorial resistance. Texas rarely grants clemency, making Darlie's path to freedom extraordinarily narrow. Unless new evidence proves her innocence beyond doubt, she faces the prospect of dying by lethal injection in Huntsville's death chamber. Her story serves as a cautionary tale about the power of public perception in criminal cases. The silly string video may have condemned Darlie more effectively than any forensic evidence. It showed a woman who didn't grieve according to society's expectations, and that deviation from the norm became proof of guilt in the minds of many. As we continue to follow this case, we must ask ourselves, what does justice look like when doubt remains? Can we execute someone when questions persist about their guilt? And what does Darlie Routier's case teach us about the intersection of motherhood, justice, and the ultimate punishment in America? The answers to these questions will determine not just Darlie's fate, but the fate of our entire criminal justice system. In a nation that prides itself on the presumption of innocence, the Darlie Routier case challenges us to examine our deepest beliefs about guilt, punishment, and the price of being different. The Darlie Routier case remains one of the most divisive criminal cases in American history. Whether you believe she's a cold-blooded killer or an innocent woman railroaded by a flawed system, her story raises profound questions about justice, evidence, and the death penalty itself. As new forensic techniques emerge and our understanding of trauma and grief evolves, perhaps we'll finally learn the truth about what happened on that June morning in Rowlett, Texas. Until then, Darlie Routier sits in her cell, maintaining her innocence while the state of Texas maintains its right to execute her. The only certainty in this case is that 2 young boys lost their lives, and someone must be held accountable. Whether that someone is Darlie Routier or an unknown intruder who escaped justice remains the question that haunts this case and challenges our faith in the system meant to protect us all. What do you think happened that night in Rowlett? Was Darlie Routier a victim or a killer? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to Dark Trail Files for more deep dives into the most controversial criminal cases that continue to divide us. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest investigations into the cases that shake our understanding of justice, truth, and human nature. Until next time, keep questioning, keep investigating, and remember, the truth is often more complex than it first appears.